What happens when suddenly we're able to 5x, 6x, 7x the amount of broadly accessible superintelligence across the world? I think this starts to become the foundation for transformative economic changes at a planetary scale. Yeah, I think we're really far from saturation. So I would add that in addition to being, call it at about 6% saturation by comparing number of OpenAI generated tokens versus human spoken tokens per minute, I think there's probably an even more important statistic, which is that there are approximately 4 billion human users of smartphones that aren't yet using any sort of superintelligence, if you will. Now, ask yourself, what happens when suddenly we're able to 5x, 6x, 7x the amount of broadly accessible superintelligence across the world? I think this starts to become the foundation for transformative economic changes at a planetary scale. Well, with full autonomy, superintelligence is arguably the ultimate user of superintelligence. Yes. Remember, every platform ergonomically wants to have its own app store. So I think that the notion of an app store being built on top of a new platform where ChatGPT and then presumably other frontier models as well wanting to become the new operating system, or it certainly rhymes with Facebook platform moment when Facebook launched that as well. I think that that's a very natural market movement, but I would also perhaps caution at some point, I think it's reasonable to expect that every pixel is going to be generated. It's not just going to be vector art or HTML type graphics. Every pixel is going to be generated. So I would view this as almost a transitory moment where apps are floating on top of ChatGPT as the new operating system environment, but it's a passing phase. At some point, every single pixel probably wants to be generated. That was my first thought. The other thought is, do you remember, Peter, back in 1987 when Apple, without Steve Jobs, launched their knowledge navigator concept?
I do. I mean,
we're living in that now.
Yeah,
we're living in that where professor is having a conversation with basically a similar type canvas that is able to pop open new apps and interact with them on demand. We caught up with the future. Approximately 40 years later, we're living the knowledge navigator future. I think that's the multi-trillion-dollar end game here, where at some point we see autonomous corporations. Yeah, I'm reminded almost by analogy of the early days of Hollywood that were shaped around vaudeville type design patterns. I think that's the stage that we're at. This is the vaudeville on Hollywood screens stage of AI for software development, where it's just sort of, on the one hand, it's great, glad that it exists and glad that it provides probably a comforting safety net for enterprises that are migrating to end-to-end agentic workflows. On the other hand, very much feels like a passing phase. I think it's an interesting modality for specifying for software development, but really, why not take a full leap and instead of specifying flowcharts for individual workflows, why not just dump in an entire org chart of a human organization, and rather than individual tasks or roles, just port over an entire company org chart and ask for an entire enterprise to be replicated.
What's your thinking?
I think it's sort of interesting because so many facets of Codex are open source and available for review on GitHub to actually trace where it appears. Codex is an OpenAI brand that seems to cover a number of different independent software tools. So it covers their code generation specific AI model backend. It's also used as a web front end for agentic software development. It's also used in connection with a command line interface tool. So they use it as an umbrella brand, as it were. But in this case, at least one of the Codex associated projects is up on GitHub. You can review the source history. And so pulling the thread on this story, it was interesting, I think, to discover that at least some aspect of this functionality appears to have originated as a feature request from a third party, from the Carnegie Mellon affiliated Software Engineering Institute back in April. That was where a user was complaining or really pointing out that human prompt typing speed is increasingly becoming a limiting factor for software development. So,
by the way,
I think we're close to the point of recursive self-improvement, and it can go in the other direction as well. We can get negative speed where the software is just written preemptively.
Alex, what does this mean in the final result? Where are we going here?
This is mechanical design getting solved. MIT, the mechanical engineering department, has an entire set of courses just devoted to training the next generation of mechanical engineers how to do product design like this. We're seeing right before our eyes an entire discipline or subdiscipline get solved in bulk by generative AI. And I think maybe even more interesting than this particular instance is the API pricing. So if you go to the API pricing page now for Sora 2, it's 10 cents per second for the base model. You do the arithmetic, that's $360 per hour. Assume 10x year over year hyperdeflation in model costs. Within the next year, suddenly it's far cheaper to outsource mechanical product design to an API call to Sora 2 or whatever it evolves into than a human. That's an entire hyper-deflationary field getting solved overnight.
Yeah, keep the
Star Trek replicators aren't 24th century. They're now just 2025.
We are really bringing Star Trek to today. That makes me so happy. I'm so happy about that.
Why wait a few centuries?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so maybe a comment first on what the benchmark is. In the past on this podcast, I've beaten the drum for the importance of benchmarks more broadly for not just measuring progress, but also accelerating progress. In this case, the benchmark OS world for operating system world is a really lovely benchmark that was initially developed by Salesforce and colleagues. And it's a benchmark that measures the ability of a computer use agent and an AI that has access to a keyboard and mouse and screenshots to be able to conduct regular, everyday, economically important tasks on Ubuntu, Linux, Windows, and Mac OS, hundreds of different types of tasks. And so what Anthropic is demonstrating with this chart is probably, again, by the law of straight lines, perhaps by the end of this year, in the next few months, we're going to see, at least from Anthropic, putting aside other frontier labs, superhuman performance at the ability to control computers for normal everyday tasks. We're measuring the ability for an AI to literally control Windows-type interface with mouse control and keyboard control and perform a variety of tasks, web browser navigation that would require.
Yeah.
And Peter, you want Jarvis. This is Jarvis, albeit not in the physical world. It's for Jarvis for controlling your computer across applications. But this is a pretty good benchmark for Jarvis for computer use.
And what could possibly go wrong?
I would say what could possibly go right, and quite a bit can go right. But I think even just taking that line, truth-seeking, and combining it with these models, I completely buy the notion that video as a first-class modality, when incorporated into chains of thought, is going to help us to discover the truth. I think it's one of the key modalities for understanding our universe.
Okay, what does that mean, Alex? Dive in a little bit deeper, please.
So when you ask a question of ChatGPT or some other frontier model, now, post ChatGPT 5, there's thinking that goes on usually under the hood. It thinks internally, sequence of tokens, before it produces a final answer. Right now, almost all of that thought takes the form of text tokens. Yes. But imagine a near future where the agent, as it were, is able to think not just in terms of text, but in terms of video. It's able to hallucinate a short video clip, basically visual imagination, imagining things that you can introspect as well. You can pop open little drop down and see the little videos that it's generating as part of its chain of thought before it answers your question. Video reasoning, I think, is going to end up being a killer app for how these video models that right now are obviously largely aimed towards entertainment end up delivering transformative economic value.
Sam's jet and seeing who he's meeting with next.
Well, one might imagine losing sleep as a public market investor that maybe the singularity, as it were, happens in some private company where there's indirect, at best, exposure via public markets. Like what happens if OpenAI and call it the 10 other largest privately traded companies suddenly have an intelligence explosion and are worth tens of trillions of dollars overnight? As a public retail investor, that's perhaps a suboptimal outcome. So I would actually view this through a very positive lens, that through indexing, through exposure to AMD, Intel, et cetera, this is now an enormous jump in exposure to OpenAI to the extent that an intelligence explosion happens there.
Years ago, It's
It's
almost
an economic
unfathomable.
transformation story for the US at a minimum. The company that BlackRock is purportedly considering buying, many of the campuses that they're converting to data centers are brownfields, including, according to public reporting, former coal plant in Ohio. This is what economic transformation, industrial economic transformation at scale looks like. And then Corning.
It's happening, and it's
This is a
accelerating.
reprogramming of the entire industrial base.
In terms of data centers and users and everything.
Well,
My mental model.
Go ahead, Alex. Okay.
My mental model continues to be that the music can continue as long as the transformative applications continue, as long as we're driving the cost of the service economy to zero, as long as transformative discoveries and scientific inventions pour out of these super intelligent boxes, then the music can continue, the data center build out can continue to the point of trillions of dollars of capex. We just need the transformation to continue and the revenue generation that results from that. I think the scenario where new data center deployments continue to be connected to utility scale grid is probably implausible at this point. There's simply too much demand for co-located new energy output that is completely off grid. As long as the regulatory environment continues to be favorable, and it does continue to be, I think it's more likely we end up in a future that looks like Colossus, where there are co-located nat gas and soon SMRs and fusion plants in a few years. And all of that is by default disconnected from the broader utility scale grid. Yeah, I think that this promises to be a big jump over 13.2.9. And I think aspirationally also represents the beginning of several different forms of convergence, the convergence between obviously robotaxi tech stacks and human-driven or supervised-driven autonomy tech stacks, obviously. Less obviously, I would expect we're going to see over the next few years, maybe 2 to 3 years, a sequence of subsequent convergences. I would expect to see, for example, the Optimus tech stack converge with FSD, maybe in some future version. And at the core, I think what we're seeing is the emergence of a vision language action model, VLA model from Tesla that's just end-to-end embodiment. It works in cars. Hopefully it works in Optimus robots as well. I would expect to see from all of the other major frontier labs also singular consolidated VLA models that work across a variety of different embodiments. It gets even better than that. In line with what we were discussing a few minutes ago about our living in the sci-fi future, you can't make this stuff up. The safety benchmark for DeepMind Gemini's robotics VLA model is named Asimov. And it's a benchmark that's semi-synthetic, but it's based on lots of different visual/language/action scenarios and the relative safety thereof. And the beauty is, if you actually go and read the Asimov paper, Gemini, the Gemini team and DeepMind are benchmarking the safety of Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics against better constitutions for safety of these embodied robotic models. And turns out that there are, in fact, better constitutions for constitutional AI that one can come up with beyond those 3 laws. But the very fact that we're now at a point in our future history where we're benchmarking the 3 laws of robotics against other better models, it's amazing. Elon has actually said in connection with this that it was autonomous. It was not teleoperated.
We're not too far from mech bots fighting in the ring.
And it's trained by imitation learning. We're so painfully close, I think, at this point to unlocking physical labor and solving physical labor. And remember, in the services economy, approximately 2/3 of all of the service labor ultimately is connected to some sort of physical task. So think of how in the future, so many tasks that no human would ever want to perform, for which there aren't any jobs even, can just be automated.
Yeah. Alex, you're in agreement?
We're going to need these capabilities for data center construction. If we're going to achieve 250 gigawatts by the early 2030s, we may not have the human labor to accomplish that. So as you know, Peter, I'm always looking for what the innermost loop of the tech tree is, in this case, mixing metaphors. And it increasingly, to me at least, looks like the innermost loop is going to look something like a recursive self-improvement of robots building data centers, training better robots.
Well,